I'd like to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Licensing and Public Protection Committee meeting. We don't seem to have anyone in the gallery, but I'm aware that people either watch this live or watch it on video later. So welcome to all those who are watching now or in the future. The agenda is separated into two parts. Part one being agenda items 1 to 5, which is licensing committee matters, and part 2, which is public protection committee matters, and that is items 6 to 12. First of all, we'll deal with item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies. I have, as far as I'm aware, only one apology, which is Councillor Skelding, who is substituted by Councillor David Hutchison. Does anyone know of any other apologies? Okay. Are there any declarations of interest in relation to licensing matters that are noted on the agenda? No, thank you. We have copies of minutes of the previous meeting at agenda item 3, pages 5 to 8. Are there any matters that people want to raise that need amendment, or are they happy to accept them as an accurate record? Thank you very much. We now turn to agenda item 4, which is noted in your agenda pack as pages 9 to 62, which is the draft statement of the licensing policy 2025 to 2030. And our officer, Matt Burton, will give us a resume over this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the request for approval to go out to consultation in relation to the statement of licensing policy for the Licensing Act 2003. We are obliged to consult on it every 5 years. We've come up to the end of the 5 years from the last time. There is a timeline in terms of a timetable, I should say, for the consultation that is at 2.8 of the report, which we're asking for you to approve. It is for approval today, consultation to go out tomorrow or shortly thereafter, for there to be a 4-week consultation, which will end in September. And then following consultation, the matter will come back to the committee with all those responses and any due changes or proposed changes for approval before it goes to council for final ratification. Excuse me. So just briefly, at Appendix A is the draft proposed policy with amendments made. There haven't been a huge amount of changes made, but at 2.6 I list briefly the proposed amendments. So some of it's just updating it to make it more clear, or to format it slightly better. We've updated the references to the cumulative impact assessment, which members will know that we approved a new one last year, which was obviously after the last licensing policy was published. There's been an inclusion in references to digital identification to be used as proof of age. That hasn't come into the Licensing Act yet, but it is due to be amended later this year or the start of next year to allow certain approved digital identification to be used for proof of identification instead of passports, driving licenses and pass cards. Excuse me. There's also an inclusion, a reference to the Terrorism and Protection of Premises Act 2025, which was come into effect this year. There's a 2-year lead-in period, but there are implications upon all premises. Obviously, this is focused at licensed premises in relation to sort of conditions and preparations that they must make when they are looking at risk assessments and factor in potential for terrorism and what they would do should there be any sort of terrorist act or concerns about that. We have committed, excuse me, officers have committed to bring a more in-depth report to members of the committee to explain a bit more about what the Terrorism Act actually means and what that says. So we'll hopefully do that at the next meeting for you as well. We've removed some sections which duplicate other pieces of legislation. We've consolidated and strengthened some of the sections in relation to the Equality Act and government guidance around that. We've updated and removed some of the model conditions in Appendix A, which people are sort of free to use and put into their applications when they make them to us. They haven't been updated in quite some time, and there is a suggestion that we will speak to all of our responsible authority colleagues with a view to getting some draft conditions that they use typically on applications to form the basis of our model conditions. And then finally, we've removed Appendix B entirely, which is a map of the cumulative impact assessment area. When we last did the licensing policy, it was a cumulative impact policy, and the two documents were sort of intertwined. The cumulative impact assessment is a standalone live document, so whilst we reference it in the licensing policy now, we treat them as two completely distinct documents. I've already gone through the time scale, so the recommendation today is for members to make any comments they may have on the statement of licensing policy, to allow officers to go out to public consultation and then bring it back to yourselves for approval before it goes to council. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councillors, any questions? Okay, so the recommendations is that members make any comments. We don't seem to have any comments prior to being issued for public consultation, and approve the consultation timetable at section 2.8. So I take it everyone is in favour of that. Thank you. If we then move on to agenda item 5, as far as the licensing is concerned, it's the minutes of the licensing subcommittee meetings, which are noted on pages 63 to 64. Does anyone have any issues they want to raise or amendments that they feel need making? Do you consider it then a true record of the minutes of that meeting? Yes, thank you. Moving on to the second part of the part 1, the open agenda. Are there any, at item 6, are there any declarations of interest in relation to public protection matters? None noted, thank you. Agenda item 7 is noted on pages 65 to 86 of your agenda pack, and it's the report on Food Safety Service Plan 25-26 and review of performance in 24-25. Our officer Gillian Taylor will give us a summary of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this item is a Food Safety Service Plan for 25-26, including a review of performance in 24-25. So it is a report that we bring every year around this time to Public Protection Committee to make the committee aware of the work undertaken in relation to food safety, and also to comply with the requirements of the Food Standards Agency. So it covers our statutory duties to maintain a register of all food businesses in the borough, to implement a risk-based programme of inspections and interventions, and to investigate complaints and take relevant enforcement activities. So turning to the plan that's in the appendix, following the general introductory sections, the plan identifies the resources within the team that we have for food safety, and also the wider role of the team, which isn't just food safety, but also health and safety, including inspections, incident investigations, and regulation of premises, for example, tattooists. Specifically in relation to the food safety, item 2.4 of the plan identifies the number of registered food premises in the borough. And as you can see, the numbers do fluctuate as premises open and close, but we had 1,020 registered as of April the 1st this year. Each of the premises is risk rated based on the type and quantities of food produced, and also their record of compliance. And that results in them being risk rated A to E. And the rating then determines the frequency of inspection or intervention that we carry out, which might be either every 6 months up to every 3 years. And that table in item 2.4 also shows how many premises are in each category and this then determines our food inspection programme. Turning to item 3.1 on the plan, it identifies that food inspection programme for 25-26 and shows that there are 490 premises due to be inspected over this year, and we do aim to achieve 100% of those inspections. Although that can be affected if we receive a large number of new registrations or if there are any kind of major food poisoning outbreaks or incidents. If that were to happen, we would focus our resources on the higher risk premises. So in 24-25, the team were very proud to have achieved 100% inspection, 100% of the inspection programme. And so we are aiming to repeat that again this year. An outcome of the inspections that they carry out is a rating under the National Food Hygiene Rating Scheme, and that gives a score of between 5, which is very good, and 0, urgent action needed. And those scores become publicly available on the website for residents to view. So the table, which is on page 11 of the food safety plan, identifies the breakdown of premises we have in categories 5 to 0. And which shows a good positive picture that the vast majority of our premises are in the 4 or 5 category, good or very good. And the officers will be specifically working with the premises who have a 1 or 2 rating relating to improvements. We wouldn't necessarily rescore outside of the inspection programme, but this can be done on a fee basis if the premises have demonstrated improvements. In Wales, there is a law requiring that hygiene rating scheme figure to be displayed. We unfortunately don't have that in the rest of the UK. However, I always say 5s are usually displayed with pride, so you will see them displayed in those premises. You may notice that there are fewer premises in the grand total for the rating scheme than the number of overall premises, and that's just because some very low risk premises are exempt from the scheme. One of the other important figures in the food plan is the number of complaints and investigations received each year, which is in table 3.2, and does show that over the last few years there have generally been a reduction in complaints and issues being brought forward to the team. In terms of performance, each quarter key data is reported to Cabinet. In the final section of this plan, which is section 6, there is a review section identifying what's reported to Cabinet on that quarterly basis. So there are 2 performance indicators. One is the number of premises with a 0 rating, and the figure for last year was 0.41%, which is well below our target of 3%. And the second one that's recorded is the number of A and B premises inspected on time. Now, last year, all of the premises were inspected. However, 2 due in quarter 2 were actually inspected in quarter 3, which did throw out our statistics for the year. So again, we do try to focus on ensuring that they are inspected in the correct quarter, but unfortunately, sometimes priorities or staff sickness or absence can affect that. And for 25-26, we will continue to report these figures to Cabinet for quarterly monitoring. So the recommendation, Chair, is to endorse the report and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Gillian. Does any councillors have any questions on this issue, on this report? Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, looks like a good set of figures. Looks like the vast majority of our premises are a very high standard for hygiene. Looks like we've got a good inspection regime. So I think we accept the report in full.
Thank you very much. I would say that the lack of questions for the first report given and this report show just how hard the officers have worked, for which I'm sure we all thank them very much. Nothing's been missed at all, so thank you. So the recommendation is to receive that this committee receive and endorse the Food Safety Service Plan. Is that agreed? Thank you. Gillian, you're on again. So Officer Gillian Taylor will give the report on the revocation of the Kidsgrove Air Quality Management Area now.
Thank you again, Chair. So yes, as you said, this item is the revocation of the Kidsgrove Air Quality Management Area. So this starts back in the Environment Act 1995, which required that all districts and borough councils were required to review and assess air quality and to declare air quality management areas where exceedances of one or more of the air quality objectives were evidenced. So in 2015, an air quality management area was declared in Kidsgrove. This was due to a likely breach of the annual mean nitrogen dioxide air quality objective of 40 micrograms per cubic metre at certain residential premises. So there is a map in the papers showing that this was essentially along Liverpool Road, close to the junctions with Heathcote Street and Gloucester Road. And they're the areas where there was often queuing traffic at peak times. So with that, the dominant source of the nitrogen dioxide emissions was essentially road traffic. So monitoring has continued at those locations, and the monitoring sites represent the worst case scenarios. And the monitoring results are presented in Table 1 of both the covering report and the appendix. And they do show fluctuations over the years, but it does show that the overall number has reduced year on year, and that it's now well below the 40 micrograms per cubic metre, which is the action figure. So government guidance suggests that revocation can be considered where there's robust evidence that air quality is 10% lower than the 40 micrograms per cubic metre figure for 3 consecutive years. Monitoring has shown that to be the case, leading the team to be confident that the reduction is permanent rather than being due to meteorological factors or other short-term factors. And the reduction is believed to be due to an increased uptake of lower emission vehicles, contributing to a decrease in nitrogen dioxide levels. And the consultation document does identify how there has been an increase of those vehicles within the borough. So each year, the council does submit an annual status report to the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, or DEFRA. DEFRA evaluate that report each year, and they have evaluated the data and advised that the air quality management areas can be revoked. So between July the 9th and 6th of August this year, a public consultation was held in relation to the revocation. And the consultation document that was put out is the one that's also Appendix A, which gives kind of some more detailed information. No objections were received to that consultation, and we received one supportive response. So hence the report here today is with a recommendation to approve that the air quality management area, which is number 1 Kidsgrove, revocation order be approved to take effect from the 20th of August.
Thank you, Gillian.
Take questions, thank you.
Do any councillors have any questions or comments that they'd like to make? Councillor Allport.
Please, yeah, I literally did a few away from it. So there was says, I was showing one of them could wait less than
Thank you. Councillor Sweeney.
Thank you, Chairman. One thing but I will point it out. If you're selling a house in one of these areas, the purchasers' solicitors will know this is an air quality area. The fact you haven't got it is good news really for the residents, especially if they're selling somewhere. Because not only got clean air, but the solicitors will look at that and think, oh dear, what's going on here? So it's good news all around with this. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the lawyers in conveyancing are now looking at clean air, how they used to look at mining searches. And it does have a bearing on the value. Sorry?
That's another issue we've got no control of.
But it is what it is, and you can only deal with what's in front of you, can't you? So thank you for that. So the recommendation is that, oh, sorry, Rupert again. Thank you very much. Councillor Adcock.
This committee voting on the implementing as well, not that long ago for similar reasons, just the natural compliance over time with vehicles becoming cleaner. The vehicle market's changed a lot in the last 10 years to do so. So I think it makes total sense to revoke the order.
Thank you. Yes, it just shows the progress that we're making. What a team. So does this committee take it that we approve the air quality management area number 1 for Kidsgrove and the revocation order 2025 effect from 20th of August, which is tomorrow? Yes, in favour? Yes, thank you very much. And Gillian, I'm sorry to this, you're on again. Could you give us a report on the agenda item number 9, the revocation of the Maybank, Woolstanton and Porthill Air Quality Management Area? You'll find this in your pack on pages 113 to 138.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this one follows on from the previous one, essentially, and is the revocation of the Maybank, Woolstanton and Porthill Air Quality Management Area. So similarly, this one was declared in 2015 due to a likely breach of the nitrogen dioxide national air quality objective of the 40 micrograms per cubic metre. Again, it was due to residential properties in close proximity to busy roads. So again, also there's a map in the paper showing that this was essentially concentrated at the bottom of Porthill Bank and Valeview and in Maybank High Street, with traffic volumes, low speed, congestion and traffic control all playing a part in the levels there. So again, where the concentrations were at the worst case scenario, monitoring sites have shown that consistent reductions over the last 5 years of monitoring. Now, this report was compiled for consultation prior to the 2024 data coming in. And that's why on this report, differently to the previous one, the information only goes up to 2023. However, I can ensure that the 2024 data is made available if councillors would like to see it. So similar to Kidsgrove, the team are confident in the reduction here is permanent, again, rather than meteorological or other short-term factors. And again, the reduction is believed to be due to an increase in lower emission vehicles, contributing to a decrease in nitrogen dioxide levels. And similarly, the report has been submitted to the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, who've evaluated the data and advised it can be revoked. So this one went out to consultation between the 1st of May and the 1st of April 2025. No responses were received during the consultation period. However, one was received afterwards, suggesting that congestion would remain post-revocation as traffic numbers had not decreased, asking why the County Council and Church of England, asking when the County Council and Church of England would manage school traffic, stating that on-street parking aggravated congestion and asking for a bus stop to be recited. And although all of those were important considerations to be noted, they didn't really affect the monitoring results or the proposal that the evidence suggests that the levels have gone down over the last 5 years and it can be revoked. So hence the report here today is with a recommendation to improve that the air quality management area number 3, Maybank, Woolstanton and Porthill revocation order be approved to take effect from the 20th of August, again tomorrow. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Do any of the councillors have any questions or comments that they'd like to make? Councillor Hutchins.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. To the officer, very, very good report. When you look at the receptors in table 1 at 2.3, we see there's been a reduction between 19% and 37%, which is great news. We all want a cleaner, greener borough, and this seems to be happening, so it's good news.
No other questions.
Previous comment.
I see previous comment. Thank you, Rupert. I know this is very dear to your heart, so I was looking at you. So does this committee approve that the air quality management number 3, Maybank, Woolstanton and Porthill revocation order 2025 take effect from tomorrow, 20th of August, is approved? Thank you. All approved. And a change of officer. Thank you, Matt. The taxi licensing framework consultations 2025 Could I ask our officer, Matt Burton, to give us a resume of the report, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, it seems to be the old adage of you wait for so long for something to come and then to come along at once. We've had 2 taxi licensing consultations opened last month after a period of time where we've not really had any look at any major changes. So the purpose of the report today is just to highlight that the 2 consultations have opened and for some recommendations for officers to send in consultation responses to the government, but in conjunction with the chair and the portfolio holder. And this is purely due to the time frames of the consultation and the calendar of committee meetings not really tying up, unfortunately. I'll go through the 2 consultations. The first one is one I think we've been waiting for a long time. And this is a call for evidence from the Transport Committee in relation to whether or not the current licensing framework is actually fit for purpose and how we can do better to safeguard members of the public, but also the people who hold the licenses as well. So you'll all be aware that our main legislation is from 1847 and 1976, so they're a little bit outdated. There have been some changes, or lots of changes really, but they're only sort of piecemeal, and they only affect like one small part of the whole regime. And what government and local authorities have been asking for a long time is for a whole review of the framework to actually make it fit for purpose, bring it up to modern times. The current legislation doesn't account for mobile phones, internet, email, app-based providers. There's very limited case law on how app and cloud-based operations work. So it can be quite hard to see how some operations can be compliant with the current legislation. So it is a very welcome step. You'll also know that from the Deregulation Act in 2015 allowed subcontracting between operators subcontract, between an operator in one authority area and another authority area. And before that, they weren't allowed to do that. They had to subcontract within the area. So what that meant was that private hire operator businesses could obtain licenses in multiple authorities. They could then have licensed drivers and licensed vehicles from all of those authorities and operate one really large operation. And that really is the business model that we see today for the vast majority of the vehicles that you see out on the roads. There are a large number of local authorities in England, nearly 300. Every local authority has their own policy. Some have joined up and have very similar provisions within them. But for all intents and purposes, there's roughly 300 local licensing policies out there, which does not promote consistency. There are some local authorities that have some very high standards. There are some that have some very low standards, and many in between. There's a lack of consistency, as I've said, and what that means is that individuals are able to, inverted commas, license shop and find the local authority or licensing authority that they may be able to get a license for when they may not be able to get one either from their home authority where they live or in the vicinity. That in conjunction with private hire operators licensing themselves with multiple councils has meant that businesses have grown and some local authorities have become beacons for applicants where there's a perceived benefit to applying with them. So whether it's quicker from when they apply to when it can be granted, whether it's cheaper, or whether the standards are lower. So what the end result is, and I've seen a news article in the hour before I arrived here, and there's a lot over the past few months where local authorities are seeing an influx of licensed drivers and vehicles from other authorities working in their area. And what it means is that one local authority may deem a taxi driver to be unfit for whatever reason, or their vehicle to be unsuitable, and they can instead go to another local authority where the standards are lower and get licensed, and then just come back and work in the same area where they've been refused or revoked. And that's the risk and the concern over the licence shopping. Again, members who've been on committee for a while will also be aware of various reports over the past 10 years in relation to how taxis have been used in sort of child sexual exploitation, modern day slavery, county lines, and there's several reports out there that highlight the risks where the taxi licensing regime has failed, and there's then been issues with taxis in that local area. Not all, obviously, just a proportion of people, but they're quite often used in those sort of organised crime circles. In relation to the differing standards, it has been considered by government previously. It was considered by the Law Commission between 2012 and 2014, and one of their findings was to make national standards, tackle cross-border concerns, improve enforcement powers. They even drafted a bill that could have been put before Parliament. Unfortunately, it never was. And in 2017 to 2018, there was a task and finish group again looking at the adequacy of the licensing regime, looking at the recommendations from the Law Commission and a few other areas as well. There were 34 recommendations that came out of that task and finish group. Not many have been taken forward, but the very first one was that the legislation should be urgently revised to provide a safe, clear and up-to-date structure that can effectively regulate the trade. And then locally, in terms of the licensed shopping and cross-border hiring, there's some information in the report that shows how Newcastle has been affected. We implemented a comprehensive fit-for-purpose taxi policy in November 2019, which changed the one we'd had previously. We've been told on multiple occasions in all sorts of formats, consultations, meetings, discussions, correspondence, that licence holders leave the authority and new applicants won't apply because our standards are too high. Those standards are ones that have been approved and agreed by yourselves, by the committee, and they're ones that we stand by. But unfortunately, what it means is that licensees and applicants go to other local authorities, they get licences elsewhere, and they come back and work here. At table 2.9 in the report, that shows the reduction in our licence numbers from 2019 to 2024. You can see we've decreased nearly 47% in drivers, 35% hackney carriages, and 36% in private hire vehicles. So it really is a significant amount when other local authorities are having such large influxes and large increases in their licences and applicants. So on to the call for evidence, the consultation. It was opened on the 16th of July. The last date for submission is on the 8th of September, hence why we're not going to be able to come back to committee to agree a consultation before it's sent in. A copy of the terms of reference and the questions that are being asked at Appendix A to your report. In relation to the second one, as time moves on and we get into the future, effectively, the government are looking at how to authorise self-driving vehicles and their operations as commercial vehicles and taxis. Current legislation, including the 1847 Act, wouldn't fit in with driverless vehicles, would you believe? So they're looking at putting in a regime where it falls outside of the current legislation, but they are going to bring in a statutory instrument that would cover how they would be authorised and consented in local areas. So that the power to licence would be taken away from local authorities, but the idea is that local authorities can consent to them being used either in certain areas or at certain times, or prohibiting them in certain aspects as well. And all that information is contained within the consultation document at Appendix B and the draft legislation at Appendix C. So the closing date for that one again is the 28th of September. And finally, back to the recommendations, what we are proposing is that officers will draft a response to both consultations, having given a really considered response. We would like to agree that with the chair and our portfolio holder. And then once we've done that, we will make sure that those consultations are submitted to the relevant government departments on time, because we really do believe that Newcastle should be responding to these calls for evidence and these consultations and putting our opinions and our experiences forward. Happy to take any questions.
Do any councillors have any questions or comments to make on this report? Councillor Williams.
Thanks, Madam Chair. There's been a rumour around that taxi drivers don't have to put a sign on their vehicles what company they work for. Is that true, or is there some basis for that rumour? I think will it be in this document? Thank you.
We're going to come on to that in our next report in relation to the door signage for Newcastle. In relation to other local authorities, as I say, everyone has their own rules and policies. Stoke-on-Trent, they have to have door signs on their private hire vehicles. Wolverhampton, they don't. Ashfield is another large authority, which we see a lot of locally. They don't have to have door signs on either. Cheshire East, I believe they do still. So it's very much dependent on the local authority and their opinions. The best practice guidance suggests that local authorities shouldn't need to implement policy provisions where private hire vehicle door livery is required. But for Newcastle, certainly we'll discuss that in the next report because it's one of the main portions of it.
Discuss it later on.
The next item, yes, Councillor.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that Matt's resume of the report has highlighted is that whilst we have the legislation, each authority is able to interpret it in their own way. And you have those who interpret it tightly and offer greater protection for their residents and visitors, and those who try and get away with, how can I put it, blue murder, and they're quite slack and try and edge it so that they get more taxi drivers. I think from the time I spent on the committee and working with the officers, and what we try to do as a committee and as a council is to do it to the best of our ability without actually to the detriment to our taxi drivers and taxi service, but mainly in greater efforts to protect our residents and visitors. And it is a hard line to follow, but you can only interpret it as you want to and do your best. I would prefer, I think, and I'm sure everybody here agrees with me, to have a good reputation for our taxi drivers rather than a bad one, which I do know that some neighbouring authorities do have. Any other comments? Sorry? I couldn't possibly comment. Councillor Adcock.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think some very good points been made. I mean, we've got a system at the moment which effectively punishes local authorities that have higher safety standards and rewards those that push for lower safety standards, and that's just not right. And I think a response to the consultation where we'll set out in your very knowledgeable way the sort of minimum standards we want would make a lot of sense. Could you just, because I forget things, can you remind me what's the status of there being is there a centralised national register for taxi drivers, and is that a mandatory thing that local authorities have to sign up to, or is that something that might form part of consultation so that information can be shared across authorities?
Partly right. There is a national register, but it's not for all licensing taxi drivers. It's only for those drivers who have had their licenses either revoked, refused, or suspended. Every local authority, every application they get for a taxi driver has to look at that register. They are legally bound to do that. If they find a record, so it would say Joe Bloggs has been refused by Newcastle, they're then legally obliged to contact us and say, we've got a record of this, they've applied to us, what can you tell us about this refusal? It doesn't mean because we've refused it, they then have to refuse it, but they then have to take into account the information that we have refused upon. And it's more likely that they will then probably come to the same conclusion that one local authority has found them unfit, so we may also. But it comes back to them having their own suitability sort of standards, that if it's not the same as ours, then it's possible that they may license someone even though we've refused them. But there is that safeguard, yes. So every single application in England and Wales has to undergo that check, whether it's a new one or a renewal. So there are safeguards. The difficulty is the difference in standards, and they're not really being consistency across the country, and that's what we're hoping from this first consultation that's been put forward, the call for evidence. That really is a push for national standards as opposed to minimum standards, national standards, so we all operate the same. Regardless of what that is, people won't be able to go from one to another to get a license. Everyone will be the same, so there'll be more of an onus on them going, presumably, to actually where they live or where they work. And that's what we're hoping for, really, and that will form part of the basis of our consultation response.
All that I would add to what Matt said is that should we refuse as an authority a taxi driver for legitimate reasons that involve safety in some way or other, not just driving, but other ways, and another authority go ahead and give them a licence, their culpability heightens greatly for any losses or damage or injury to the person so harmed. And I think that legal officers should be mindful of that. And I'm sure it will be pointed out to them at some point or other. I do love the law. Councillor Sweeney.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think you're reading the terms of reference for this, call for evidence, well, it's call for evidence, yeah. The terms of reference, it gives the officer a chance to get a lot of things off his chest. I think it's quite the points they're after, which are fairly obvious when you read it. I think it gives Matt a chance to have a good old few comments, which I think myself and Joan will happily endorse, won't we?
Absolutely. Matt, you work very hard for us and it's much appreciated. So do we agree that the content of this report as a committee is agreed, and that following consultation, the officers submit responses in agreement with the chair and the portfolio holder? Because there's got to be a 24th September deadline, and that's why we're trying to expedite it. Is that agreed? Agreed, thank you. You're not off the hook yet, Matt. You're on again. So could I ask Matt, as the officer for the taxi and private hire licensing policy, it's agenda item 11, pages 197. This is the biggie. And I'm sure you've all read it and I shall test you on it. Pages 197 to 310. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. The biggie, well, you've built it up now. Members will remember that we came for consultation at the end of last year, October 24, with a draft proposal on what we intended to do with our taxi licensing policy, because we have it. We're not statutorily obliged to review it at a certain period, but we choose to review it every 5 years at the very least. And within those 5 years, we actually reviewed it about 4 times. So it is something that we keep on sort of a live footing and make sure we are looking at it as and when we need to. But we got to the end of the 5 years. We've consulted. We've had a 12-week consultation. There then has been a bit of a delay in terms of going through the consultations, working out the responses, amending our proposals in some instances, and also speaking with our colleagues and other local authorities to try and align what we're doing, again, to promote some consistency and some standards, certainly across the very local area. So it has taken a while to come back. I apologise for that, but we are here now. There was also a secondary consultation which related to the suitability guidance, which was it's an appendix within our guidance, within our policy. We carried out that as well. We received a few responses to that. So I will give you a brief overview of those consultation responses and the main points where we have made proposals. Some that were in the original document in October have been changed and amended. Others have stayed the same. So when we went out to consultation, there were sort of 6 main points. One was in relation to vehicle criteria and moving from a maximum age policy and body type and moving into an emissions and fuel type criteria. And we had a timescale for when we would seek to license certain vehicles due to their use of internal combustion engines. That's moved forward, but I'll explain that more in a moment. We are reinstating grandfather rights for hackney carriage vehicles when transferred between proprietors, because that is something we removed in 2019, and they have been asking for it ever since, and we do believe now is a good time to reinstate those rights. We did propose to remove vehicle door livery, and this is a point that Councillor Williams was making just a moment ago. We have changed our original proposal back to now suggesting we retain door signage, and I'll explain that when I get to that section of the report. Originally, we suggested removing the suitability guidelines appendix from the policy and having it as a separate document. We haven't done that. Our proposal now is to keep it within the policy document, so it's all one comprehensive document as opposed to having multiple documents. The main reason for that is the statutory standards for taxi licensing suggest it should be one cohesive policy rather than sort of fragmented documents. We've removed the requirement for licence holders to sign an acceptance of receipt of their code of conduct or conditions. That's mainly because we're going to be looking at sending electronic licences in the near future rather than providing hard copies of them with every single licence. So that just wouldn't be feasible. And the final section was to amend our knowledge test slightly from requiring an applicant to achieve 75% in every section to them requiring 75% overall. And you'll remember that we amended our taxi knowledge test a little while ago to remove some of the sections because they were already being asked. We were duplicating in effect on our safeguarding and disability training. In terms of responses, we didn't receive any comments whatsoever in relation to the grandfather rights, the suitability guidelines, in terms of removing them, the licence holders signing and the amendment to the knowledge test. So we've gone ahead and just implemented those, or we're proposing to implement those. Then in relation to the suitability guidance consultation, we received 2 responses. Excuse me. One was from a local authority officer just suggesting some of the provisions within what we were adopting weren't quite in line or in keeping with one another. And one was from a licensed driver suggesting that the guidelines make it too hard for people to enter the trade. The suitability guidelines, I should explain, are sort of model ones that have been produced by the Institute of Licensing in conjunction with the Local Government Association and Licensing for Lawyers and the National Association of Licensing Enforcement Officers. So it has been quite a large-scale operation. They're the ones we've already adopted, and this is just the newer version. So the proposal is that we adopt them as they are written. In relation to the fuller policy consultation, we received 22 responses in total, 19 from licensed drivers, vehicle proprietors and operators, 1 from an alderman of the council, 1 from the Guide Dogs Association, and 1 from the Staffordshire County Council School Transport Team. There is a summary of their responses at Appendix D. I've further summarised it in point 2.8 of the report into 3 separate areas because these are the main ones. So the first one is the proposal where we were going to remove door livery. 17 responses in relation to that aspect. There were 8 responses in favour of retaining door livery, and mainly to assist customers in locating the vehicles, public safety and advertising of the companies. 6 responses in favour of removing livery. Those respondents thought it was unnecessary due to technology. They can look messy. And there were 3 responses that said that door livery damages their paintwork, but there was no further details provided on that one. So not quite half and half, but more in favour than not. The second proposal from the previous consultation was that we would amend the vehicle criteria to the emissions and fuel types and with an aim at carbon neutrality. 13 specific responses to that. 7 of those were negative or concerned about the proposal. Primarily around the lack of infrastructure, suggesting that the phasing should be delayed and cost implications of buying vehicles and charging at home. And 6 responses were positive, stating that it was good for the environment, it made sense, moving to hybrids was good. And you'll be able to see from previous figures that our number of hybrids replacing internal combustion engines is quite high. So we are already on a really sort of steep curve in relation to that. There were a few other small matters that were brought up, one in relation to executive private hire vehicles, one about fees, which wasn't relevant, one that they don't want to have more frequent tests for older vehicles, and one not liking, or multiple not liking the fact that we asked for both an MOT that you and I would have, but also a council test, which is of a higher standard. In relation to the door livery, as I said, we originally suggested removing door livery from private hire vehicles, and that was in line with best practice guidance from the Department for Transport. Having gone through the consultation and having liaised with our colleagues at Stoke who have retained door livery, and that was approved by their cabinet last month, and also from operators, officers, having gone out and done a number of compliance operations recently, we've found it difficult, and we know what we're looking for, to actually locate taxis, and that's because there's no signage on them whatsoever other than plates. So we find it difficult. So the members of the public are going to struggle, or people who don't know what they're looking for are going to struggle. So we've changed our proposal, and now we are intending on keeping the door livery for private hire vehicles as it was in the previous policy or current policy, should members agree to that. In relation to the policy element around the vehicle criteria and the emissions levels, again, that stemmed from the Department for Transport best practice guidance, which suggests that authorities should look more at the emissions and safety ratings of vehicles rather than age limits. We discussed that, and you'll remember from the last committee that Stoke and ourselves promoted the exact same standards in both our consultations, because we were doing it at the same time. Stoke received a number of responses in relation to that, and they were broadly supportive of it, even more so than what we had. So we are proposing to retain that element. However, due to the length of the consultation and the time frame, we've looked at just extending some of the years. So instead of starting the first aspect in April 25, clearly we're past that, we're looking at starting the first element in April 26. So that would be to not accept any any applications for Euro 4 or 5 standard vehicles after April 26, unless it's already licensed with us and is wheelchair accessible, in which case we'll accept them for a further 2 years. Again, after April 26, any new applications would have to be, if they were internal combustion engine only, would have to be Euro 6 emissions compliant. From April 28, we would not accept any new applications for vehicles that are powered solely by internal combustion engines, so they would then have to be hybrid or zero emission vehicles. And then from April 2030, the council will not accept any renewal applications in relation to ICE vehicles, internal combustion vehicles, which means that every new vehicle at that point would have to be hybrid or zero emission. And then in March 35, which seems some time away, but it'll creep up on us, looking at stopping the licensing of hybrid vehicles and only licensing zero tailpipe emission vehicles. As I said, Stoke, this is the exact information that Stoke have approved, other than the March 35 date. They've removed that. We have kept it in purely because we're going to be looking at this policy at least once more in 2030, if not before that. And we can always look and amend those timeframes if we need to. At 2.11, I won't go into a huge amount of detail. These were the small other aspects that were sort of raised during the consultation. Some of them we actually already provide for within the policy, so we haven't changed anything in that respect. The fees weren't part of the policy consultation; they're a completely separate process. Not having additional tests for older vehicles, we have retained that, as have Stoke. Legally, we're allowed to inspect all vehicles up to 3 times a year. We only do it twice, but we do find, and we have found previously when we've looked at it, the older the vehicle, typically the more mileage it's done, typically more wear and tear it's done. So we inspect it more regularly to make sure it's still fit for the members of the public. And then we have had and we frequently get responses and comments about removing multiple tests and not having the normal MOT that you and I would have and having the taxi one. But we have always been of the opinion, both ourselves in licensing and the garage technicians, that the MOT is a very minimum standard, and that is not sufficient for licensed vehicles that are carrying our members of the public day in, day out and doing more mileage. Your regular user will drive 7,000 to 7,500 miles a year. Your average private hire vehicle will drive somewhere between 20 and 50,000 miles a year. So it's a significant amount more. And we believe that a higher standard of test is really suitable and appropriate for what we're doing. There was one response from an alderman who was in favour of retaining the door livery. They have experience of, even when they have used text messages and apps to book their vehicle, they still find it difficult to locate it. If it's dark, a blue vehicle could mean anything in effect. And a copy of their response is Appendix D. We had a response from Guide Dogs, who provide a lot of very helpful information in relation to issues and concerns that their users quite regularly face. Their full response is Appendix E, but I have summarised it table in 2.13 in terms of their proposals. Several of it is strengthening and clarifying what our position is in relation to drivers and operators' duties are under the Equality Act. Where we believe that it needs strengthening, we've agreed that, and we've agreed appropriate wording and put that into the policy. There's an element which suggests there should be a zero tolerance approach to offences under the Equality Act with a view to prosecution. Again, we agree it's sensible and appropriate, but we do have to deal with cases on a case-by-case basis, and we do have to have accordance with our corporate enforcement policy. So whilst we will look at that in every instance that we can, obviously we need to be mindful of the facts. And the final one was in a recommendation that we carry out test purchases with assistance dog owners, because there is quite a regular report, not locally, but as a national problem, that people who use guide dogs often get refused or just ignored, and vehicles drive past. So we've not included that within the policy, but it's something that we're actively looking at. We don't believe it needs to be in the policy, but it's just part of our compliance and enforcement regime. So we are looking to do that. And the final consultation response was from Staffordshire County Council School Transport Team, who we work quite closely with. A lot of our vehicles, as Stoke and many other local authorities, are used for school transport, both those with special educational needs and disabilities, and just some people who need taxis to get from their home to school. It's less of a response, it's more of a balance to what their contractual conditions are and to what our policy is. So there haven't been any particular changes made off the back of that, but they were just showing that we are pretty consistent with the conditions that they have. The one point that they have raised is that it is a condition of their licence to have standard livery on display of their vehicles. So when a vehicle turns up at a person's house to pick up a child in the morning, the parent or the adult knows that vehicle, they know which operator it is, they know it's the right vehicle for them, and they're not just sending their child out to a vehicle, whether it be the correct one or not, that has no signage. So in terms of recommendation, councillors, it's twofold. One is to agree the proposed policy document, which is Appendix A of the report, with all of those proposed changes that I've just gone through. And the second is that we approve the policy document takes effect from the 1st of January 2026. That'll be for the main body of the policy. The sections where it has a specific date, so 1st of April 26 and so on, obviously they'll take effect at that point. But from the 1st of January, we can start instigating all of those sort of stepped approaches. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Do any councillors have any comments or questions they'd like to? Councillor Adcock.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks for the report and lots of detail there. I can understand their concern around the vehicle transition. You know, it's something we'll all have to deal with, and it is expensive, and so I can understand the concern around that. Although I suppose it does mirror what's going to happen nationally with the change between selling of hybrid vehicles and electric vehicles and so on. So that does follow a national trend. it's great that we've done the same as what Stoke has, because as you referenced earlier, it's important that authorities work together to have the same standards. Do we know if other local authorities are going to follow the same emissions guidelines? Because this only really works if everyone's doing it, because we don't want the operators going somewhere where they can still run an older vehicle. It has to be done in coordination, as you know. So do you know if other authorities are doing the same?
Certainly in Staffordshire, there is a board within the Staffordshire County Council. I forget the acronym, but we have all looked at and met regularly around amending our taxi policies to look at emission standards as opposed to vehicle ages. Everyone's done it slightly differently, other than ourselves and Stoke. It was modelled on a proposal that Cannock put in place in terms of the timeframes from moving from your Euro 4s and 5s all the way up to sort of hybrids and electrics. So they were the first in the county. So we've followed that. Stafford are going through the process of doing their own, or have recently gone through the process of putting their own in place. Staffordshire Moorlands have something in relation to Euro standards as opposed to age limits. And I know the other local authorities in Staffordshire are obviously looking at it because it's coming from Staffordshire County Council. A lot of other local authorities nationally are looking at it as well. There are some that are quite strong in terms of their policies. It isn't by any stretch everyone at the moment. You're right, it is in line with national changes that are coming in terms of sort of phasing out of internal combustion engines, the sale of those. What I am hoping and will be considered as part of the consultation response that we've just spoken about will be that there's something in terms of national standards that promote that across all local authorities. The only thing that's there nationally at the moment is the best practice guidance, and it's not statutory guidance, so it's everyone having regard to it and then deciding how they best move forward. We've taken the view that certainly in that part of the best practice guidance that it is the right thing to do. So we've moved forward. Every local authority should be looking at that guidance and then making their own decisions, but some may decide to go a different way.
Yeah, and I think, well, we need Wolverhampton City Council to make sure they have the same guidance as we do. I think it makes sense, as you said earlier, to keep it under review, because we don't know exactly what it's going to look like in 10 years with the transition, with the infrastructure. I think it's right, as you say, that we revisit it and see if the 2035 target for hybrid is realistic in transition to EV. So I do support keeping that under review. My other question was around, I mean, I think door signage makes sense, although some of the consultees had mentioned about the door signs damaging the vehicle in some way. Do you think that's a valid concern?
In some local authority areas, possibly. We don't mandate how they stick them to the doors. You can get them so they're on magnets, so they just whip on and off, if you like. I've never known those to damage vehicles. You can get them so they are sort of physical stickers. And whilst I'm not aware of them damaging vehicles, you can sort of get like sun damage and changing of coloration of vehicles and things. So I wouldn't discount it totally. I don't know enough about it, but there wasn't any further information in terms of the consultation responses. As far as I'm aware, there isn't really anything that holds that up, but there may be something I don't know.
I think it'd just be good to know more information about what they're specifically concerned about, because I think it makes sense to have the door signs on. Just if there's a practical thing we can do to make it easier, then we obviously can, hopefully. But if it's not really a concern, then it's not worth worrying about.
Yeah, I think by keeping it broad and allowing them to sort of affix them in whatever way suits them, I think that allows the flexibility for different types of material of not only stickers but of doors. So we do have some vehicles, I'm aware of some vehicles that have aluminium doors, so you can't stick the magnets to them. So then they have to have the stickers. But I think having that flexibility, that allows them to sort of choose the best thing for them, whilst also promoting our sort of public safety objective by having them present, and also obviously helps with the advertising for those people who wanted it for that reason.
Councillor Hutchins.
Just a quick question, Matt. What was your thinking behind the knowledge test? Rather than getting 75% in each section, it's now a 75% overall. Because if I'm reading the sections right, understanding of and testing of written English, working out fares and givens change, taxi legislation, the highway code. They all sound important. So I'm just wondering what your thinking was with the 75% overall rather than 75% in each section. Thanks.
Yep, absolutely. Recently, within the last 2 years, we amended the taxi policy, the taxi knowledge test, and we removed a couple of sections, one in relation to sort of child sexual exploitation and safeguarding, and one in relation to disability equality awareness. The reason we did that is because we consolidated our training in relation to those, and there's actually a test in relation to those, so we were duplicating them. So now there are fewer sections. What we've found is in terms of our tests, we have a bank of questions for each one. Some, whilst all important, some have more questions than others. So 75% in a 16 question section means you need to get 12 out of 16. 75% in a 4 question section means you've got to get 3 out of 4. What we found is a lot of people will get 2 out of 4 in one of the sections. So they're passing every section apart from that one where they're getting 50%, which is 1 question. So what we've looked at, sorry, I apologise, I don't have the figures to hand, but the majority of the people who have failed the test since we've implemented it would pass, having only missed 1 or 2 questions if this was the standard. So what we're trying to do is not sort of reduce the standard particularly, but to try and make it so that 1 or 2 small errors don't affect their ability to sort of pass that test. So that's the thinking behind it. That's what we're proposing, and we think it would work, because we do find people that pass that and then they go, oh, I'll go somewhere else then, rather than have a second go, because either tests are done differently or to a different standard, and we don't want to scare people away with the standards that we have. We still want to attract people in, but we need to be mindful that we need to be sort of accessible for new people coming into us.
Thanks for the explanation, Mark. It certainly sounds a bit more fair. Thank you.
Any other councillors got any questions? Councillor Williams.
Can I just say I'm extremely pleased we are keeping the signage and livery. I think it's essential, especially for people who are partially sighted, and a lot of disabled people and young people when they're out on this in the pubs at night. So I think one of the best policies. Thank you.
As in many cases to do with this committee, I agree with Councillor Williams. I think the signage is important. I just look at the title of this committee, which is Public Protection. And I always think about myself, if I've had a nice couple of glasses of wine and it's about midnight or 1 o'clock, would I get in this car? Would people know which car I'd got in and be able to track where I'd gone? A dark blue taxi is not enough. It needs to say, you know, was it, what are they called? What's the one? Whatever the name is, you can tell from the signage. And if it's big enough and it's clear enough, at least the person's traceable when they may have sort of come to harm in some way or other. And that might just be a traffic accident involving another vehicle. It might be something more nefarious. And I think we're on the same page as usual, Gillian, that, you know, it's public protection and it's actually being able to identify. And I think that's important. I'm glad we've made that decision. Thank you very much. Any other comments? Councillor Sweeney.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'd just like to congratulate really Matt and his team on this.
It's amazing.
I can remember sitting in this room, I'm sure the other councillors can, and 50 odd taxi drivers on those seats over there and storming off and having a little drive-by around the town at 5 miles an hour. So didn't like it. I think the way you've carried the taxi drivers with you, I think is excellent. I think the way you worked with Stoke as well, because I was on Radio Stoke about 6 months ago and they didn't play it because there was no story. So, well, we did the same Stoke are doing. We exactly everything's the same as Stoke. Oh, and that was it. Never heard it yet. I think it's excellent. I think it's a good policy. I think the door signage, I agree entirely with you, Jill. It's absolutely, especially when your eyes aren't so good and you get in the car at night and it's got a big sign on the side. No, it's excellent. I absolutely commend it. And I thank you and the rest of your officers for the job, Matt. Thank you.
Councillor Allport.
Pardon me, I'd like to agree with Councillor Sweeney, really. I've been on this committee for a long, long time, and we weren't always as stringent at protecting the public regarding like taxi drivers. I mean, before the committees were streamlined, the licensing and public protection, two separate committees. On the public protection committee, we spent the vast majority of the time dealing with appeals against taxi drivers that weren't appropriate, and that took up most of the business of the committees, which we're not doing anymore.
Matt, I think you and your team are the hero of the hour. I think one of the great things that the taxi drivers cannot complain about is that they weren't consulted. They've been consulted all the way through, and that's a big plus that you always do. And I also think that people don't realise how much hard work is involved in doing the consultation and finding out what other authorities are doing so that we've got a good comparison. And that makes us bulletproof, because you can't say we're doing something extraordinary when we're actually not only consulting, but looking at what others who are sort of ancillary to us geographically are doing as well. So, I mean, if I could burst into applause, Matthew, I would. Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think a majority of the taxi drivers now realise that a lot of these rules and regulations are for their own good. They're an important part of, I call, public transport. In this area, a lot of people living on the estates to get about to the shops, going to the town centre, use their taxis. Just another point, I've got another 2 points, Madam Chair. One came before the committee we were on about the private number plates. When that private number plate came out, I thought it was just an ego trip where the driver wanted his own private number plate. It was picked up by the MOT. It was always picked up by somebody where it ended up before the committee. But talking about two other people, they're with the private number plate, there's no space in between. They can go where they want. They can go park on the red, park where they want. If there's cameras there, they can't pick up the vehicle registration because there's no gap between. And I think it was we've talked about it. If you hadn't got that, you'd no insured. The people in the taxi weren't insured. So it was something that was picked up. I'm really pleased that I think it's a warning to us for the future to make sure that we come down really hard on these people that put their own private number plate without the space in between the figures. But the other point I'd like to make, really pleased that the wearing of a badge. I've always maintained that the taxi driver's licence should be on the dash or in view of the passengers. Pleased to see it'll be, they have to wear the badge. People will be able to see who they are. Again, the same as the signage of the taxi on the doors, the signage of the person driving. And it shouldn't, we're not here to make drills, just straight drills out of the sky. We're here to make that job a good job, a safety, a job that's they're working in the safety and the safety of our residents. It's so vulnerable, and especially vulnerable residents. And I agree with Madam Chair, it's so important that we do this. And I think it's a really good piece of work. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. It looks like you can polish your halo, Matthew. The second part of the meeting is to deal with a closed agenda, disclosure of exempt information prior to urgent business. But just before we do that, could you actually check that the item 12, the minutes of the Public Protection Subcommittee meetings, that they're an accurate record? Does anyone want to raise any points? Councillor Adcock, how did I know? Thank you so much.
Thank you again,
I rely on you.
I just wanted to point out there was a further meeting on the 13th of August last week, which I chaired. I don't know if that's not in here that I see. I don't know if that will come to the next meeting. Yes, okay.
We won't miss it out. I think Jeff's made a note.
It's just down to the publication timescales. It was after this was published.
Yeah, we're tight for time, weren't we, Matt? Okay, so there's no matters of urgent business. You've agreed that the minutes are approved. So at 8:16, I call this meeting to a close. Thank you all so much for attending.